Just less than a month ago, authorities announced that the conflict had reached the grim milestone of 40,000 Palestinians dead. The now revised death toll comes as the conflict nears its one-year anniversary. Despite growing calls for a ceasefire, Netanyahu says he won't budge on giving up control of the Philadelphi corridor on Gaza's southern border with Egypt. It's been a major sticking point in negotiations. Take a listen to what Netanyahu had to say.
Once we left the Philadelphia corridor, Iran could carry out its plan to turn Gaza into a base, a terrorist enclave that would endanger not only the communities around it, but would endanger Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Beersheba, the entire country of Israel. It became a huge terrorist base. It's clear Gaza must be demilitarized. And it can only be demilitarized if the Philadelphia corridor remains under firm control and is not a supply line for armaments and for terror equipment.
Well, let's get more and cross over to Jerusalem to speak to Irris Makler, France 24's correspondent there. It's good to see you, Irris. So Netanyahu once again insisting that Israel must keep control of the so-called Philadelphia corridor if a deal is ever reached. What's Israel's response been to all of this? What's the public been saying?
What we have heard from the Prime Minister tonight, it's very similar. He gave a speech in Hebrew on Monday, tonight in English. It's like a stump speech, a campaign speech, explaining why Israel must hold on to that very narrow corridor between Egypt and Gaza. And he explained all the reasons that he sees it being, with his trusty map and pointer stick, but why it's vital to Israel's security. What his opponents are saying, and they include Benny Gantz, who was in his cabinet for most of this war, he describes the Philadelphia corridor as an operational challenge, but not an existential threat. And what we heard from people is this: if it was so important, why didn't Israel go in there on day one? And when the Prime Minister was asked about that during this press conference, he said that there were operational problems and that that was only clear for that after 3 months. Well, it took another further 4 months for Israel to go in to the Philadelphia corridor, to Rafah and to the Philadelphia corridor. And of course, there is a pincer movement. They could have gone north and south. They didn't. They gave priority to something else. It's also relevant, I think, and this is being pointed out in Israel, is that when Israel proposed a ceasefire hostage deal in April, there was no mention of Israeli troops remaining permanently in that area. And when that deal became the international deal in May, that was approved by, first of all, the United States and then the United Nations, there was no mention of his permanent Israeli presence in the Philadelphia corridor. So all of this altogether makes people here suggest that Benjamin Netanyahu has fixated on this of late. Not that it isn't strategically important, but what they're saying is it's not more important than the lives of the hostages. Time is running out on them, and they say that Benjamin Netanyahu is prioritising his survival over the survival of the hostages.
That's, of course, been a key argument from the protesters who've been protesting in the last few days. There's more protests in Tel Aviv tonight. Are Netanyahu's speeches doing anything to convince his critics that he's got control of the situation?
That's a very good question, because, this looks like the execution-style killing of these 6 hostages, at least three of whom are on the list. Had this deal gone ahead, they would have been rescued already and would have been back in Israel. So the futility of it, the pain of it, the fact that they were killed just 2 days before Israeli troops found them there in that tunnel, all of this really has been a turning point for the Israeli public. We're seeing continuous protests at a level that we haven't seen before. And I guess the question is, will it also be a turning point for the politicians? Because we have heard from a number of people just tonight at this protest, at the latest protest, who were hostages themselves and still have family members who are hostages inside Gaza. They say that Netanyahu has sacrificed the lives of their relatives on the altar of the Philadelphia corridor, a stretch of land that can't be as important as human life. Now, while Netanyahu denies that and gives a detailed explanation of why he thinks it is vital, can he carry the public with him on this? Will this be a turning point for politicians as well?
Irris Makler, our correspondent in Jerusalem there. Thank you so much for that update. We really appreciate it. Let's move